All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Dr. Bowser Basketball Podcast. I am Chris Bowser, and joining me again today to help break down the Arch Madness Championship game is Missouri Valley basketball savant, Brian Duttler. Thanks for joining us again, Mr. Duttler.
Happy to be here.
Absolutely. So I would say that we had a phenomenal 4 days in St. Louis. We got a chance to watch 10 games in 4 days. And we kind of previewed and updated everyone along through the weekend. And so we're now to Championship Sunday. Let's set the scene. It's an 11 a.m. tip, CBS nationally televised audience, the Enterprise Center in downtown St. Louis. The end of daylight saving time the night before. We get a performance by Generald Wilson, quite possibly the best anthem singer in all the land. Kevin Harlan on the call, and we get the UIC Flames and the Northern Iowa Panthers. UIC earned its way to the championship with wins over Murray State and Drake. And then Northern Iowa got to Sunday morning, needing 3 wins over Evansville on Thursday, Illinois State on Friday, and Bradley in the semifinals on Saturday. Brian, let's start with your thoughts on the journeys of both teams to get to Sunday morning.
Well, yeah, absolutely. So you start taking a look at initial bracket wise and things along those lines, and especially where it fits on the Northern Iowa side of things with Belmont sitting in that 1 seed. Really, everybody wanted to kind of steer clear of that. And you thought the bottom half of that bracket was going to be a little bit more manageable to be able to make a run. And then the seas parted a little bit with Belmont getting beat at noon on Friday. And then all of a sudden, then you have Murray State that plays right after them and plays that UIC team. And we talked a little bit about the lack of execution and enthusiasm probably from Murray State in that game, that really that UIC had not a whole heck of a lot of problems in defeating Murray State on Friday. And that moves into semifinal Saturday and taking on Drake, which was their 3rd game in 3 days. And he got to about that 10-minute mark of the second half, and Drake was done. You could tell UIC had no problems executing on the offensive and defensive end, and it was clear sailing for UIC to get into that championship game, especially the last 10 minutes of the second half versus Drake.
I think that's spot on. And then let's take a look maybe at UNI's journey, because they, too, like Drake, were somebody that semifinals, that was their 3rd game in 3 days. And then even moving into the championship game, 4 games in 4 days. But let's talk about the first 3 games of the journey for the Northern Iowa Panthers.
Yeah, I think you take a look at the Evansville game, and the shot right before halftime put the Panthers behind going into halftime, which ironically was one of the only times all tournament long where they really trailed for any sort of amount of time on the scoreboard. Even though the clock was ticking at 15 minutes, that was about as long as they were behind in any game. And that led into a hard-fought win against Evansville. Things opened up a little bit easier for them as the game progressed. But Evansville, for an 11 seed, Evansville played really well on their first game against Northern Iowa. That led into Friday playing Illinois State an hour later than they anticipated after the double OT that we saw in the first game, and with Bradley and Velpo, and kind of throwing off the clock a little bit. Long nights, at the same time, Northern Iowa executed at a high end, whether it was on the defensive end or on the offensive end. There's a lot of positive things as we work through the bracket, and being able to take care of Illinois State by a 22-point margin in the quarterfinals. And that led to a meeting with Bradley on Saturday for semifinal Saturday. And the same thing, it was fast execution. It was crisp offense, and Northern Iowa taking the lead early and being able to grow those leads all the way into the first half, where you were sitting at halftime with some comfortable leads. No leads comfortable, but the margin you were at, you knew good things were about to build upon if the defense could keep up with each team. And then being able to beat Bradley, holding on there at the end, so to speak, the last minute and a half, 2 minutes, but getting that 73-69 win for Northern Iowa, and then taking it on to Championship Sunday.
That's great stuff, Brian. I agree with all of that stuff, too. Being in the arena for all of those games. We'll talk about it later, too, in our breakdown of the championship game. But I really thought that the Northern Iowa fans showed up in all of those first 3 games. I thought that they came to their feet and they got vocal at times when the defense needed it. And I know that maybe sounds weird to folks, but energy matters in the building. For example, when we walked into semifinal Saturday for that first matchup, everyone in our group said, feels like a dead building right now, right? And it was two smaller fan bases. And when the Bradley and the Northern Iowa fans started rolling in the second half, that's when the energy started to pick up a little bit. I would say the other fan base in the second semifinal game, Bradley's fan base, they were just extremely loud. They made it a great college basketball atmosphere for a conference tournament neutral site. So kudos to all the fans that showed up at Arch Madness this year. So let's dive in to the first half of the Arch Madness championship game between the Panthers and the Flames. It was fast paced. It was high scoring in those opening 20 minutes. In fact, I would tell you that our group of folks were extremely surprised that there were nearly 90 combined points in the first half, 89 combined points in the first half. But UNI set the tone right away with crisp offense. They jumped out to an early 9-2 lead, actually forcing UIC to burn a timeout prior to the first media timeout at 16:47. Brian, talk a little bit about the feel of the game those first few minutes.
Yeah, the field was Northern Iowa was the aggressor the first 4 or 5 minutes of the basketball game. A really strong, concerted effort on getting the ball inside, whether that was trying to throw it in the well or a dribble penetration, being able, if the kick out was there, I believe we made one nice 3-pointer in that first 4-minute stretch of time. But being able to drive the lane, get inside, and really get whatever they wanted to at the hoop, as we'll talk about through the course of the game, the shooting, field goal percentage wise, and the offensive execution continued at the high rate that the Panthers had seen the second half versus Evansville in both Friday and Saturday's game. Yeah, UIC, a little bit different game plan to start off. Northern Iowa was very attacking on the offensive end. I would say UIC was a little bit more on the passive side of things, was able to get some looks inside, but the ball was going out, and to us, it really looked like they were settling for jumpers and trying to get a little bit of flow, especially on that last game after either 3 or 4 games. The teams that seem to attack that basket seem to have the early success rather than relying on jumpers.
That's agree completely. One of the other things that I thought was really interesting as UNI was attacking the lane, whether it be on the dribble or on the pass inside, they utilized the pump fake a lot. And one thing that we talked about prior to the game was we were a little concerned about how UNI would deal with the athleticism and the length of UIC up front. And that was one of the ways, was they would get into the lane and they would get in on 2 feet, use the use of the pump fake, and then finish strong at the hoop with 2 hands, which I thought was really good. So by the time we then reached the first media timeout at 14:56, Northern Iowa had stretched the lead to 16-7, continuing to control tempo early from that UIC called timeout to the first media timeout. Brian, what did you see in that next couple of minutes?
Well, like you said, especially on the offensive end, UIC was ready to jump out of the gym on the defensive side of the floor. There were plenty of times throughout the game, just seeing Tristan Smith down below and it being in good position, especially on the offensive end, and whether it's once or twice or 3 times sometimes, being able to pump fake, use the body, good control. Northern Iowa had a lot of opportunities that way, just being able to take control of the game with that positive momentum going to the hoop. And the first 10, 12 minutes of the game, there really wasn't a whole lot of change. Northern Iowa kind of grew the lead, played some pretty decent defense, and then you end up having most of the first half played in that 7 to 13 point margin after some great 3-point shooting. Benny Swire comes in, and really it was so much of a catalyst early on for the Panthers, hitting some big shots, being able to drive to the hoop. And while he ends up in double figures for the game and get through Trey and Leon, how they kind of transgress through the second half, really Ben Schweiger was the guy that kind of provided that spark right in the first half of the first half. There again, RJ Taylor comes in the first half too, and been on a little bit of a heater from Friday and Saturday's game, and he ends up hitting his first shot, another 3-point shot, and then takes a couple other heat checks, so to speak. Probably not necessarily somewhat into the flow, but you can see that he was feeling it, and he provided a nice little spark off the bench again in the first half.
Absolutely. And so over the next few minutes before the next media timeout, UNI kind of continued to build momentum. As you said, they built the lead up to 13 at 27-14, kind of playing with balance offensively, moving the ball well. We'll probably talk about this later, but UNI had 31 made field goals for the game on 25 assists. And the team is super dangerous in March when they don't care who scores, right? I think that was a big deal. After the TV timeout, though, UIC responded. They chipped away. They cut that 13 lead down to 7, making it 30-23 at the next media timeout. And UNI steadied things late in the game, or late in the half. And so after a Will Hornseth floater in the lane. The Panthers called the timeout with 4:32, holding a 38-29 lead. Brian, I want to talk about that a little bit. I don't see Coach Jake a lot during the regular season call timeouts right before a media.
Yep.
However, he did it at least twice in the championship game, which I thought was super smart. Good strategy before a media timeout to then maximize the rest for his players who are playing their fourth game in 4 days. But I want to talk about something you noticed too. The difference between how we kind of utilized our timeouts on Saturday versus championship Sunday.
Yeah, a Saturday timeout as far as execution wise, they fell where they fell in good execution. But the interesting thing watching in the arena, most as a manager, former manager, you're listening for that first horn, right? To make sure that you let the coaches know that that's first horn and get the players off the bench and out. And hopefully, when that second horn is blown, you're actually ready to get close to start the play. Now on Saturday, whether it was the hot play, whether it was just the way Northern Iowa was reacting to Coach Jake's coachability, coaching on the sidelines, Northern Iowa was ready well before the first horn, and they were on the floor ready to go. And it didn't matter if they were on the defensive end of the floor, and it didn't matter if it was on the offense. Before that first horn, Northern Iowa was out on the floor, and they were ready to go to attack Bradley. A little bit different with the CBS game. I believe the timeouts are about 15 seconds longer as well, so you get a little bit of extended rest. But Northern Iowa was very cognizant on keeping those players in those seats on the bench as long as they could for that first horn. And it's not necessarily that big a deal, but if you can keep off your legs an extra 20, 30, 40 seconds compared to the day before through these breaks or the course of the game, that's gonna pay dividends. And I just got an interesting thing just being in the arena and taking a look at that.
I think so too. And I can't remember exactly when the other one was, but that one with 4:32, there's one in the second half where he did this also. But in the first half, that was 4:32 remaining. So we know we're going to get a media at the under 4 timeout. And so I just thought that was genius use of timeout strategy. They hit a shot, they push the lead to 9, they take a quick out, and then the media happens just about a minute and a half later, right? So a minute and a half game time, we're at a media timeout, and I think that's really great. So once out of that timeout, you and I had a key sequence. UIC's Ahmad Henderson knocked down 2 free throws, and then Ben Schweiger hit a 3 off an assist from Tristan Smith, pushing the lead back to 10, heading into that 3:08 media timeout. So I thought that was really a critical sequence there. UIC continued to fight back after that 3:08 media timeout. Jace Nathaniel hit a 3, and Elijah Crawford added 2 buckets, trimming the lead again. Brian, talk about UIC's ability to create offense off the dribble in the first.
Yeah, absolutely. As we talked a little bit about before, the first 10 minutes, UIC was really conscious jumpers and a little bit more of the perimeter weave on the top. But then you start taking a look at the last 10 minutes, and it was, you can see the game plan, what the game plan was going to be the rest of the game. And it was basically a lot of one-on-one. It was a lot of clear out ball and just taking whoever was guarding, especially Elijah Crawford. I mean, the first half, he got a lot of clean looks at the bucket, a lot of back downs and dribble penetration, being able to attack the hoop by himself, and a lot of clear out. And there wasn't really a lot of opportunities for kickouts, but you could tell that it was primary. We're going to clear out. We're going to take the ball to the hoop with whoever's got the ball. And if that was Elijah for most of the time, remaining part of the game.
Even with that offensive efficiency picking up for the Flames at the end of the first half, you and I did lead going into the locker room, 48-41. The stats maybe back up why. The Panthers shot 67.9% from the floor in the first half, including 50% from three-point range. Brian, this was a completely different pace than what we were used to from the Panthers. Talk a little bit about what you saw in the first half that was different from the first 3 games of Arch Madness.
Yeah, the 48 points was high water mark for us. 50%, even though it was 3 or 4, I believe, from 3. It was well executed. Not many foul opportunities, foul shots. We were 3 or 4 from the line. Like I say, it was that 7 to 12 point margin that Northern Iowa operated in. Very efficient. Once again, we'll get in later on. I got some stats with overall tournament and how they compared, but the 19 made field goals, had 15 assists in the first half. And when the ball is moving and you're assisting on plays, Most teams are hard to guard. Teams are hard to beat. And Northern Iowa is extremely difficult when you're getting 15 assists on 19 buckets.
You bet. Even with the offense, and that was the focal point in the first half, you and I continued to do the small things that help win games in March, right? They won the rebounding battle. They created some second chance opportunities. And as you mentioned, they shared the basketball with those assists in the first half. So coming out of the half, let's break down the second half. So the second half turned into maybe a little bit more of what we expected for the entire game. I think the pace of play tightened up a little bit, and I think the defense on both ends tightened up a little bit. Small runs and then responses. UIC made its biggest push early in the second half, right? At the 12:30 mark, Rashad Washington Jr. knocked down a three, cutting the UNI lead to 2. And it was really the first time that UIC had seized momentum.
Mm-hmm.
But that was as close as they would get. Brian, talk about maybe how they chipped into that halftime lead and cut it to 2 there by the 12:30 mark.
Yeah, offensive opportunities, kind of going back to the end of the first half, you could see what the plan was. It was going to be one-on-one ball. Got some buckets in transition on a few of our turnovers, which uncharacteristically, as well as we assisted, we also had hit double-digit turnovers in back-to-back games, which for Northern Iowa doesn't happen a whole heck of a lot. As they used for the season, I believe they were under 10 turnovers per game. Having to overcome that a little bit, but UIC, we knew the run was coming. Just didn't, you could just kind of feel it. I mean, it was some perimeter shooting in a few fast break points that led right into UIC being able to trim down the lead.
That sounds good. But about 28 seconds later, Trey Campbell answered with a 3, stretching that lead back out to 5 and stopping the run. A few minutes later, Ben Schweiger delivered another big shot, knocking down another 3 at the 11:28 mark to push the lead to 62-54. Brian, talk about maybe where the UNI crowd got into the game then with those back-to-back threes by the Panthers, and how do you feel their presence was felt by the team in the Enterprise Center?
Yeah, they kind of looked from above, from where we were sitting, having both sides clad in purple, knowing the right times to stand up and cheer, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I think anybody that listens to this that's a Northern Iowa fan knows that our defense is what we're hanging our hat on. It's what Coach Jake Hands is known for and wants his guys to play the hardest on. And the crowd responds when the defensive effort is there. And when the offense starts scoring and you need a key stop, and that crowd was there, and they made themselves very loud, very noticeable, squelched anything that the UIC could put out.
And it was really after the 11:28 mark there, it was really trading baskets back and forth for the next. I see there was, I think it was at the under-8 media, and you looked at me and said, does UIC have one more run left? And I said, I think they absolutely do. And so with 5:53 remaining, Jace Nathaniel hits another 3, trimming that lead to 6. And so, that's where we as fans, we get a little nervous, right? I mean, we felt like we had been controlling the game, the majority of the game, and they hit that 3, they trim it to 6 with about 6 minutes left to go. But that's really where the Panthers slammed the door. Around the 5:30 mark, Sam Silverstein came up with a steal, but UNI couldn't convert as Crawford missed a jumper. Moments later, Trey Campbell knocked down another 3, assisted by Will Hornseth, pushing the lead to 9. And from that point forward, UIC never got closer again. Brian, talk to us about your thoughts on the last 6 minutes of the game and how we kind of really systematically shut the door the last 6 minutes.
I'll take it back just a little bit further, right to that 10-minute mark. This was right after UIC did get the lead down to 2, and then we come back in back-to-back possessions. You have the three-pointer by Trey. You have the three-pointer by Schweiger as well. That pushed that lead back to 8. Thing that kind of looked as it was who was taking care of Elijah Crawford the last 10 minutes of the game, right? And it was kind of a guard by committee, so to speak, in the first half and a little bit in the second half. But once we got to the last 10 minutes, Leon Bond made his presence on Elijah. Now, Elijah did get some points, got some buckets, but the frequency of the look got a lot more difficult for him. Weak side defense was able to help on any drives. And then at that point in the game, the remaining point in the game, UIC struggled making shots. And just that simple change of, if they gave out a defensive MVP in the tournament, I think most of us would agree that Leon Bond probably deserves that defensive MVP just for the on-ball defense, guarding the toughest guy that each team had.
I agree with that. I mean, going back to Friday night, he really took Johnny Kinzinger out of his rhythm, right? I did the same thing on Saturday, and I'm going to blank on the Bradley player's name that he did it to, but he absolutely did the same thing Saturday. And then you were right. about 10 minutes to go. Leon Bond really put a focus on Elijah Crawford, and it slowed him down at the perfect point in the game, right? The other thing that has to happen there that happened was that UNI made UIC one and done on those shots, right? We really locked down the defensive rebounding end of the floor and then took our time and kind of methodically scored, whether it be from the free throw line or attacking the rim, and got a couple of timely threes down the stretch too.
Yep.
And so UNI closed the door. They secure an Arch Madness championship with an 84-69 win. And so for Panther Nation, they had a phenomenal Sunday, start to their Sunday. A couple of quick things. That is the first time in Missouri Valley Conference tournament history that a team that was playing on Thursday won 4 games in 4 days to claim the championship. It's also the first time the number 6 seed earned the championship as well. UNI finished the game shooting 63% from the field and over 52% from three, knocking down 12 three-pointers. They also moved the ball very well, finishing with 25 assists on 31 made baskets. They controlled the flow from the start of the game. Another wire-to-wire finish. Brian, talk to us about the statistic you heard about UNI and being tied or trailing in the entire tournament.
Yeah, it was 34 seconds going into the game, I believe. And some different things when it comes to ties and lead changes. In the Evansville game, there were 3 ties in the game, and there was only 2 lead changes. In the Illinois State game, there were no ties and no lead changes. It was UNI from the tip. Bradley was close. There was no ties and only 2 lead changes in that game. And then in the UIC game, it was never tied, and it was another wire-to-wire finish. And going into halftime there in that Evansville game, trailing, and it's like, oh, no, here we go again, because that's kind of the feeling that Panther fans get when we seem to play Evansville. But just overall, the ability of UNI's offense paired that with their defense, put a style and a level of play on display in St. Louis that you could see that they'd been building. Even though they had a couple losses towards the end of the season at home, they were really close losses. And the train kind of got a little bit sideways on the tracks after those losses, but they were competitive, and they kept building that momentum, and they rode that all the way to St. Louis to a championship.
I think so too. I got messages from friends from all over the country that maybe don't watch a lot of Northern Iowa basketball on a regular basis, and they were very complimentary of the flow of the offense and how people shared the ball. And so those folks that I heard from are really great basketball minds. And so that's high praise from some of the folks that I got messages from all over the country. That's really cool.
Along with that, for me, just looking at the stat tournament, I've been talking a lot about the assists to made baskets, right? And went back in and looked at the season stats before the tournament. And for the season, Northern Iowa had made 916 field goals, and there was 526 assists on those, right? So you're looking at about a 57% clip. In the tournament games only, the 4 tournaments, they had 78 assists on 112 made baskets for a 70% clip.
Yeah.
So when you are able to take 4 games in 4 days and you essentially increase your assists to made field goals by 13 percentage points, you're going to have a successful run. And that's exactly what happened. And I think that's the stat of the tournament.
I think so too. Some of the things I like too, obviously, we talk about it all the time. We are constantly talking in the stands about attack the rim, get into the lane, right? Start your offense there. And UNI had 34 points in the paint on Sunday, which is fantastic. 34 of their 84 were in the paint. And so I just think when you attack the middle of that defense and you get some buckets in the lane, in the painted area, it makes it a lot easier later on when you drive into the painted area, because you're going to have people will start to collapse and they will leave wide open shooters on the 3-point line. And I would say almost all of our 3-pointers on Sunday were not contested.
Yep.
So a couple of other things that I like, some of the secondary stats that maybe we don't talk about a lot. UNI had 8 second chance points, 8 fast break points, and 23 points from their bench, which is fantastic, right? You've got, so folks that were coming in off the bench were very productive. On the other side, UIC did create 14 second chance points, 12 points off turnovers, but they struggled to sustain offensive rhythm in the second half, shooting just 37.5% after halftime. Individually, Trey Campbell led the Panthers with 23 points, hitting 6 out of 9 3-pointers. Ben Schweiger added 18. Tristan Smith filled up the stat sheet and this was really fun. 9 points, 8 rebounds, and 7 assists.
Yeah.
And so close to that elusive triple-double. For UIC, Elijah Crawford led all scorers with 28 points, and Ahmad Henderson and Jace Nathaniel also reached double figures. Felt like, though, every time UIC threatened, Northern Iowa had an answer. Let's take a moment maybe to salute the all-tournament team.
Right.
And for the 2026 edition of Arch Madness, let's start with Jalen Quinn from Drake. He scored 22 points versus SIU, 31 in the upset of the number 1 seed Belmont, and then 14 in the semifinals to average 22.3 points per game at Arch Madness. Next from UIC, Rashad Washington and Elijah Crawford. Crawford had 19 versus Murray, 12 in the win over Drake, but was nearly impossible to stop with 28 and 5 on Sunday. Washington chipped in 10 in the championship, 23 points and 6 rebounds in the semis, and 17 and 9 in the quarters. Finally, our 2 Panthers earned spots on the all-tournament team, Leon Bond III and Trey Campbell. Brian, why don't you talk about our 2 Panthers on the all-tournament team?
Yeah, especially with Leon to start out with, had a little bit of a rough game to start against Evansville on the offensive side of the ball, but defense didn't lack. His 10 points in the Evansville game. Then followed that up with back-to-back 19-point performances against Illinois State and Bradley. And then in the championship game, finished with 10 points. As I said earlier, he was a defensive leader. He was a defensive stopper. And Northern Iowa teams that can rely on that one guy to get the stop and provide the pressure on their best gun, that's where Northern Iowa, those teams perform the best. And that's exactly what you saw in these 4 games. Trey, he was the consistent leader. Begins the tournament with a 23-point performance, ends the tournament with a 23-point performance, and then the 2 middle games, essentially, he's 12 and 13 points. So that reliable outside shooter made some big threes, big moments in the game when they needed them. Trey was there to take that shot, and the efficient ball handling and getting everybody involved was great to see. And for a kid that grad Cedar Falls, going to school in Cedar Falls, seeing him to be able to have the level of success and has been built that level of success, it's just awesome to see him be able to continue his career for at least one more game.
Absolutely. And so he and Trey Campbell, then we should mention, was the Doug Elgin Most Outstanding Player. So he was the MVP of the Arch Madness this year. And so that puts a cap. It's just so much to fun to think and talk about this week. Kudos to the UNI coaching staff and the student athletes, obviously, on their accomplishments. Let's give a shout out to the band and the spirit squads, the dance team, the cheerleaders and the band. They help provide all kinds of atmosphere in the building all weekend long. And then thank you to the fans for showing up, right? I can remember the first couple of years heading down to St. Louis, and it was our first couple of years in the Valley, right? That it wasn't a thing yet, right?
Yeah.
And so we didn't have a lot of support in the stands. Even in the championship game in '93, there weren't a ton of people there. But it has steadily grown, and St. Louis has become something that I think a lot of UNI Panther basketball fans put on their calendar. They know that they're going to be in St. Louis. Hopefully they pack for 4 days every year because we want to be there through Sunday all the time. And it's become a way for our friends, some of our friends and our former managers that we spent a lot of time with in college. It might be the one time that we all get to see each other together for the year too. So it is fun to talk about. It was an absolute blast. Brian, do you want to talk a little bit about what it was like to be back in St. Louis this year?
Yeah, I absolutely described it earlier. You hear about the Valley tournament, that it's a family reunion that happens to have a basketball tournament attached to it. And whether that's with your own fan base, with other fan bases, it's got that, it's a spirited competition, but yet it's a friendly competition. Had to take a few years off and being able to attend with my son's baseball schedule, which was great to travel and watch him play. But now that he's ventured off into the coaching realm of baseball at St. Mary's University in Winona, it's kind of nice to be able to get back to some of the traditions that you're able to accomplish with some of your friends and acquaintances that you've had in your own college years. And, for me, just kind of being in the arena again, it was, the longer you're there, the longer, obviously, the positive vibes kind of flow, right? But it really felt good to be associated with Northern Iowa, to be able to kind of bask in the success of the team, and just a lot of positive energy around the team and around the fans. And After 20 years having Coach Jake at the helm, he's hit some pretty important milestones with career wins in the Valley, now the Arch Madness leader in career wins. But he provides a steady rock for all of us to get behind. And with a guy leading our program like that, who wouldn't want to get behind him?
Right. Absolutely. And so a lot of our group are they're not just superstitious, they're extremely superstitious. And so we have some of the same things that we do every game. We try to sit in the exact same seats every game, in the same section every game. I'm going to give a shout out to another podcast that I know my wife watches, but not going to lie, Jared Corbin and I do turn around and not watch free throws and it seemed to work for us specifically in the championship game. So that was a lot of fun. And we've got that one guy, Jared Corbin is that guy for us. The guy is the eternal pessimist, but we nicknamed him Salty a long time ago. But whenever he gets salty, the Panthers start to play better. And so we like salt early and often at our Panther games, since that's a lot of fun for us too. So now we can have a relaxing championship week and turn our focus to Selection Sunday. Do we want to, and for any of our fans, we are going to try to do another podcast later in the week that maybe does an NCAA tournament preview and kind of maybe where we think the Panthers might land. But Brian, let's talk about very quickly, if you've done a little bit of research, what seed line do you think the Panthers end up on, in your opinion? And then who then might be likely matchups based on your research so far?
Yeah, absolutely. Research is my middle name, so I'm going to come with some hard-hitting facts here. So basically what you're probably looking at for Northern Iowa, an outside chance of being a 12 playing a 5, but probably most likely being in that 4-13 matchup. Depends upon how the big boy conference tournaments work and if we have any bid steals and all that good stuff. But you start taking a look at potential 4 seeds. If you just look at the net rating, which everybody's going to use a different kind of level of how they're going to get these things bracketed out with bracketing principles and conference affiliations and who can play on Thursday, all that kind of stuff, right? But for 4 seeds, you're kind of looking at Virginia, Louisville, Texas Tech, or Vandy kind of sitting in that 4 seed kind of spot. You start looking in that 5 seed, now you're talking about Alabama, Arkansas, Kansas, and then in the net, the team that I thought that's number 20 right now is St. Mary's. And we know how the NCAA likes to pair a mid-major with a mid-major, whether that could be in a playing game or somewhere along the lines, just to kind of have that mid-major at least get to the second round. It'd be a nice little interesting rematch earlier on in December, where Northern Iowa didn't go out to Moraga, got beat 58-63, which was a great game, one of the many games in California that we played in November. Another thing to take a look at is the last time Northern Iowa was in the tournament in 2016, we played Texas in the first game, followed that up with Texas A&M. Might as well complete the three-peat and Texas Tech looking there. And that's just kind of got my mind peaked up, obviously living here in Dallas and listening to the Red Raiders guys coming in the golf course all the time. So it'd be nice to possibly take a look at a Northern Iowa Texas Tech matchup as well. But basically everybody has us pretty much in that 5-12, 4-13, whether it's a Tennessee, Virginia, St. John's, possible Wisconsin, depends upon how the Big 12 tournament goes. And those are the kind of level teams that we're going to be looking at taking on. When Northern Iowa goes to a tournament, they're there.
Yep.
They have a long history of making people recognize the team from Cedar Falls. And it'll be interesting to see who the draw is going to be. But whether it's an SEC school, a big West Coast team, or whoever, it's going to be kind of nice knowing that between 5:10 and 5:45 on Sunday, we've got nothing to worry about just other than watching Northern Iowa's name pop up on our screen.
Right. It's going to be a lot of fun. Of the teams that you mentioned there, Virginia stands out to me as a team that would play a similar style to Northern Iowa. I mean, it's not Tony Bennett anymore. However, they still play a very similar style to Northern Iowa. I also don't think when you list some of those other schools like Arkansas and Texas Tech, they're long, they're athletic, they play a little bit different style. But I do believe, like you said, whoever UNI has played in the past in the NCAA tournament, those teams have felt our presence. I think for the most part, we've been able to dictate tempo in those games and get folks to play our game. And I think that's when you get to the tournament, that is one of the biggest deals. Who do you match up well against, and can you make them play your style? And so that's going to be a lot of fun. Hopefully we will be back on later this week and talk a little bit more about breaking down the NCAA tournament for the Panthers. Other than that, I want to thank you, everyone who has taken a chance on us to listen to our Valley preview and then updates along the way, and then the championship recap today. For Brian Dutler, I'm Chris Bowser. This has been an episode of the Dr. Bowser Basketball Podcast, powered by Sports Guys Iowa. We'll be back later to talk NCAA tournament preview. Have a great championship week, everybody.